afternoon. My name is Christina Strasfield, and I'm the museum director here at Guildhall. On behalf of our executive director, Ruth Applehoff, and the staff and board of Guildhall, we'd like to welcome you here today. It is our great privilege that we're going to be having a gallery talk with Phyllis Tuchman, our curator, and I know you're going to be amazed by the amount of knowledge you're going to get in this tour. I'm just going to give you a little bit of background information about Phyllis, and I also want to let you know that she's going to be available to sign books, which are available for purchase in the gift shop. We are filming this talk, and this talk is going to be on our web page and on our YouTube channel. So if you do not want to be photographed at all, please stay in the back. We are hopefully going to get just a slight group shot, but if you don't want to be in it, and you're part of the FBI and you're undercover, just stay in the back. Just to give you background information on Phyllis, Phyllis Tuchman was trained as an art historian at the Institute of Fine Arts, the graduate division of the New York University. She has written extensively on Picasso, minimalism, and abstract expressionism. Tuchman was published in Art Forum, Art in America, Art in Auction, and other influential art journals, as well as Town and Country, the Smithsonian, New York Newsday, and websites such as ArtNet and Obit Mag. We wish to thank Phyllis for doing an outstanding job of putting this exhibition together. It was a labor of love for her from its initial inception 3 years ago to its fruition. When Robert Motherwell was in his 70s and looking back at the period when he lived in East Hampton, he recalled, I did my best work there. In this spirit, this exhibition calls attention to Motherwell's early work and explores the contribution that Motherwell made to the abstract expressionist movement in the context of East End artist community. Thank you, and we welcome Phyllis.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. I'm kind of overwhelmed because I once came to a walkthrough here and there were only 4 people, me and the Lauders, but this is a big crowd, so if you get tired, there are some seats, and if you get tired and you want to leave, please, at least there's no tennis on, so we lucked out there. Before I begin, I want to thank Christina. It was a dream working with her. It was a dream working with Ruth Applehoff. Anything we needed, Ruth made sure it was provided. No one scrimped on where we borrowed paintings, and that was very exciting. And the beautiful book is Ruth's doing. Genevieve is here somewhere. I want to thank Genevieve because she's raised an enormous amount of money, which a show of this sort has to be heavily funded. And I want to thank my friends, the Rosenbergs, Carol and Alex. I'm like their permanent house guest, and that is as nice a thing you can say about friends, that they don't tire of you, and they are just wonderful people. I knew Robert Motherwell the moment I started graduate school. His third wife, Helen Frankenthaler, was a very dear friend of mine, and it was, as only a 21-year-old, I used to call her Helen, and I felt funny calling him Bob, so I used to go in and call him Mr. Motherwell, and he was a real sport about it. And it was a thrill for me to be able to think about his art for all these decades and then to be able to make sense of it. It's an unusual show in being the early work of an important pioneering artist. This painting was made when he was only 29. In those days, 29 was like being 6 months old. If you remember, de Kooning didn't have his first one-man show till he was 48. And this was true of many of the abstract expressionists. They were deep into their 40s. But Motherwell was recognized immediately. Peggy Guggenheim, who was then married to Max Ernst, and they were in the United States because of World War II. They became buddies when Motherwell, in the summer of '44, came out to stay in Amagansett. This is a painting that is so embedded in East Hampton, in the East End, in Long Island. It tells us something, one, about Robert Motherwell, two, about abstract expressionism, and to some extent even more about the rise of abstract art in the United States. When it was originally made and shown at the Coots Gallery, Motherwell called it, in abstraction with scallops. And I mean, the scallops, obvious, the muscle, the circles, but when he renamed it abstraction with sand, then you blink your eyes and you're seeing circles. And it's one of those magic, the glass is half filled, the glass is half empty. The meaning of abstraction in the 40s in the United States, even though we see representational aspects in all of the works in this room, they were non-representational paintings, they were abstractions, and they were radical in their time. To work on the show, I read a dissertation by an art historian who lived in Connecticut with Motherwell for about 8 months. And this was in the early 80s, at the height of Clement Greenberg's asserting the picture plane and blah, blah, blah. So of course the dissertation writer said, oh, in the 40s, Motherwell was asserting the picture plane, and he had him in the forefront for that. And my feeling looking at the show in the room here, in the gallery here today, is that we see the representational aspects. We see the figures, we see the scallops, we see the stick figure. And I think today the dissertation writer would be saying, oh, Motherwell was, a figurative artist. And that's one of the interesting issues of the show. Now, in talking about this painting many years later, Motherwell said this was what the sand and the water looked like in the winter in the Hamptons. And people like me, raised on Greenberg, it comes as a surprise because you would think it was a free choice of color. But the color in many of these pictures relates to something in reality. Motherwell did later say that he didn't make up a color or a shape. And he did say to Barbara Lee Diamondstein in an interview many years later that when he started, even though he was a young artist, he was making mature paintings from the beginning. And that's really what we're celebrating in this exhibition. And the fact that he was making mature paintings before any of the other of his future colleagues is astonishing. In 1946, he was in a show at the Museum of Modern Art that Dorothy Miller curated. And this was a legendary series of shows. In 1959, Frank Stella was discovered in one of these exhibitions. Motherwell was included in 46. He was the youngest artist. And Pollock, Rothko, and Still would not be included in one of these 14, 16 American painter shows until 1952, 6 years later. So Motherwell was the avant-garde of the avant-garde. I suggest in the catalog that this at one time was the base of the picture. He talked about all the time that a painting is made by a series of mistakes, and you change them as you go along. It also has sand. He had begun making collages. He was well aware that Braque and Picasso, in their Cubist pictures, used sand. and he certainly was taking advantage of the beach out here. And also there's wood veneer and this beautiful collage element. The pictures in the beginning are the size of collages, and in his method of working, he moved paint and shapes around the way he would move cut paper. So that was part of the process of completing a work. And this was a big advantage, that he knew that, you know, you didn't have to make a drawing and you can just correct your mistakes, move stuff around. This painting, Line Figure in Beige and Mauve, was owned by Pierre Charot, who built the house he had at Jericho and Georgica, the house and studio whose photographs are in the back room. It's really interesting. I saw this in storage in the Wadsworth Athenaeum, so had the opportunity to turn it upside down. And when you turn it upside down, it looks like a head. The ochre in this form, I think, reminds me of a Greek vase. And Motherwell had been a philosophy major at Stanford and then in graduate school at Harvard. And he had a little pretentious streak, which was okay because that's what, you know, super educated people sometimes do. And he used Greek words in artist statements he made. And I think it kind of confirms how deeply he knew Greek art. By the time he went to study at Columbia, he studied with one of the greatest art historians of Greek art of the century, Margaret Bieber. So he was well more aware of Greek art than normal. And in that case, this kind of stick figure is like an archaic Greek vase. But if you turn it upside down and it's a head, it's like, you know, a kind of almost reference to Freud and psychology. And it's one of it's part of this now you see it, now you don't quality of his art, that it's so open-ended. And that would be something that was significant about abstract expressionism. I'm also quite taken with this purple, which he later said he would have changed the color slightly, but it couldn't be more contemporary. I think at Ralph Lauren the other day, I probably should have bought a purple shirt to wear while we're doing the walkthrough, and then we would have been totally coordinated. But I think it's a magic little painting, and the fact that it was owned by Pierre Charot adds to everything. Before I walk away from this corner, this painting was bought by the Museum of Modern Art from Motherwell's second solo show. And it was shown a month later at the Museum of Modern Art. And when it was shown at the museum, that's when he renamed it. Now in the other corner, the Homely Protestant, that tall ochre painting, and basically one of the masterpieces of his career, that was also owned by the Museum of Modern Art. They were both deaccessioned so that the museum could buy a third painting. The third painting is in such terrible shape that it never leaves 53rd Street. And so that's sort of ironic, because I think this is one of my favorites. I just totally love the idea that you look at it and you see scallops, and then you blink your eyes and you see circles. Excuse me. Hi. I'm sorry. I'm walking past Ulysses. It's a slightly later painting. Ulysses, Motherwell was fascinated by poetry, And when he was at Stanford, he studied with one of the great poetry, well, with a poet, but also one of the great poetry commentators of the century, Ivor Winters. By the time my sister was in college, we had Ivor Winter books all over the house. And he had a lifelong love of poetry. And so Ulysses relates, ironically, he talks about, he used to keep James Joyce's Ulysses. He had many copies of it. He had it in all the rooms in his house in Greenwich, Connecticut. And he used to just pick it up and read it a couple pages at a time. But this actually relates to Ulysses, the epic. And I mentioned that Motherwell would repaint pictures, but for some reason, he made two versions of this one. The other one is in the Tate, and we have no explanation why he made the same painting twice, except that we know that Clifford Still did that. And you know, you can see that with some of the other abstract expressionists. He was trying to, by this time, the Surrealists had gone back to Europe. He was almost abandoned by all his mentors. He had to become friends with the people his age, and I think that might explain it. But what's really cool about having this painting near the first two we looked at is that the colors are still the colors of those pictures. And there is a consistency in the palette he uses. You're going to see in the skirt, of the red skirt, that purple comes out again. So that's an interesting tendency. Now, when the poet was in the collage show at the Motherwell collage show at the Guggenheim Museum last fall, this just had so much oomph in it. I think it was overlit, and that orange was just almost like a neon light blinking on and off. Motherwell traded this painting with Rothko in the 50s. And I don't know if any of you saw the Rothko retrospective at the National Gallery. It was a number of years ago. Bill Clinton was still president because he was at the opening. And the greatest Rothkos are the orange and blue ones. And I think it's very telling that Rothko owned a Motherwell that was orange and blue. But you can see it's a collage, and that you get an idea of how he moved around the shapes. This paper shape over here becomes a painted shape in something like the Voyage on the other side of the room. The poet, who we don't know, it's a generic poet. I just heard that someone identified it as Lorca. That's news to me because I was going through all of the documentary material. But the other thing that fascinates me here, and with another painting we're going to see, is that if you see this as a torso, and these as legs, and this as a long neck, you're looking at an early version of David Smith's tank totems. And David Smith would not make these sculptures for another 15 years. But they were very, very close friends. And there is this quality of the figures that Motherwell made in the 46, 47. They look like David Smith sculptures. And one of the things that came out of doing this show is that Motherwell sort of has been marginalized. He's still considered a pioneering abstract expressionist, but he was never seen as being on the level of Jackson Pollock or de Kooning or Rothko. But one thing that has come out of the show is that you see elements of Rothko, you see elements of Still, you even see elements, we'll see in the other room, of Barnett Newman, who was not yet a painter. You see elements of de Kooning. Motherwell was front and center, but for some reason, possibly because he came from a wealthy family, and this came up at the panel we had, he lived on the other side of Montauk Highway. Big deal. He was the lightning rod for this group. In 1947-48, when they founded the artists, the subjects of the artist school, it was Motherwell, Rothko, initially Still, David Hare. Barnett Newman came up with the name. And the idea for the school was hatched out here. Clifford Still and Rothko drove out here. So I think we're really proud. One, we all love the paintings, and I mean, everybody who works here at Guildhall, we're like thrilled. But also, Motherwell is now getting some of the credit, and he's been moved more stage center because of this show. The painting over there, the one from the Museum of Modern Art, once the gods are good to you and you're able to borrow a painting, a masterpiece from the Museum of Modern Art, it's easier to borrow paintings. And so we pretty much got what we wanted. There are only 2 paintings we couldn't borrow, and that was because of their condition. So I'm very proud that Motherwell is being seen well. I think this is a very gutsy painting. It's very vibrant. If you think of what the other abstract expressionists were doing, Pollock was still making very clumsy paintings in the Springs. De Kooning was, making masterpieces, but he was still a few years off from making the women paintings. He was making the black and whites. Gottlieb was only beginning to make the pictograms, which is what this could be compared to. And this just has so many decisions and the scratches and the whatever. It's just hard to believe that he, at a certain moment, decided it was finished, because it looks like he was constantly at work. So he goes to Mexico in the beginning of the 40s with Matta, the surrealist. Matta, they were a couple months apart in age, so they had this shared culture. Matta went with his wife, Anne Clark, who was an American. They go on the boat, and Motherwell meets a beautiful Mexican actress, and he marries her. And this is a portrait of Maria. It's kind of amazing because it's so dark. And on the back wall here is one of the great discoveries of the show. The Whitney Museum owns a really large elegy to the Spanish Republic. And Motherwell is known for those Spanish elegies. And it's a big painting. So practically, the Whitney shows the big painting that's associated with the artist. We were surprised, it's a small painting, and Motherwell and his wife moved to New York. They're having problems in their marriage, and she leaves him. And he claims that it's a red skirt because he was very upset and tempestuous, whatever. But in looking at the painting and writing the wall label, I realized this is the kind of Mexican skirt that Frida Kahlo used to wear. It's not that Frida made it famous, but it was a certain kind of province of Mexico. It was the native dress. So when Motherwell made this dynamic picture, he put his Mexican actress in Mexican clothes, and then he played around with abstraction, so that if you only saw this part of the picture, it's an abstract. And it has these amazing diamonds, and I can't get over that it's the same violet of the early painting. And if you look at the skirt and the top of her body and her neck, her red hat, and the little, you are looking again at a David Smith, right? It's David Smith. I mean, it's these ideas are in the air. They're very important. And Motherwell's the one having the ideas. Now, another reason I'm proud that we got this out of storage at the Whitney, I was beginning to say it was never shown in my lifetime, and then I looked at the date and I was like, oh my God, it must have been. But from when I was in high school on, this painting has never been seen. And when Christina put it on this wall, I thought that was very gutsy. Christina installs a show like nobody else. And when you look at this painting from all the way on the other end of Guildhall, it just holds the space. And that's when you realize it's not small. He has incredible scale, and the choice of the red is astonishing. Now, on the wall label, I mentioned that this is a portrait of Maria, and Homely Protestant over here. Motherwell talks about it as a self-portrait. He was looking for a name for the painting, and he claims to have opened up Finnegan's Wake and put his finger down in a surrealist style, and it said Homely Protestant. I did not put on the wall label because I didn't think it, I just realized this is being put on the website. I almost shouldn't repeat the story. But he finds out years after that homely in James Joyce's language is not unattractive. It has a different meaning. And he goes on about, well, I was very handsome when I was in my 40s. And so he kind of disavows it being a self-portrait. When I became friends with Helen Frankenthaler when I was 21, this hung in their living room. And I used to sit there waiting for Helen, staring at this painting. And it's always been a special love of mine. But I realize now, especially after I reread the wall label yesterday, this painting was in the living room opposite Mountains and Sea. And everybody knows Mountains and Sea is this famous stain painting. I mean, it's just, you see the canvas. So as I remembered this painting, it had a rough texture. It was very creamy. It was thick. And then it comes out of the crate. This is very rarely seen at the Met. Hopefully, it will be in the new building, although that I've been reminded the new building is the old building at the Whitney. But it's not a crusty picture. But because, again, I was raised with color field painting, I had a different memory of it. Also, do not remember the green. The green was a revelation. And the green pops up in some of these paintings almost as a landscape illusion. We were trying to figure out if this is a table that the figure is by. But this disc is also in the Poet on the opposite wall. And again, I probably shouldn't say this because this is going on the website. it's a great image, but the arms are like a snow angel. So you almost feel it's moving or it's a bow tie. But what is significant about this is that Motherwell has this ambiguity in all these pictures. And that's what abstraction meant in the 40s. What we think of as abstraction, or what we have seen as non-representational painting for the last 30 years, is something completely different than it meant in the 40s. Abstraction was a much more open, ambiguous topic then. But I love those buttons on the top of the Homely Protestant. And also, I think one reason I remembered it as being creamier and thicker is how Motherwell drew just by scratching into the picture. And then you look at it and you think, what's that? We don't know. And that's so fabulous. This becomes a kind of affectation. You'll see it in the next painting over. But also, if you come back and watch the video, or the video that Michael Blackwood made, Motherwell is really intent on all these lines, and he spends a lot of time going back in the picture and emphasizing the lines. They had great meaning to him in what it meant for him to make a painting. Now, this work keeps its ochre ground, and as you know, ochre is a very Motherwell color. When we get to the other room, and even the next picture, I think a lot of these pictures, paintings, began as single monochromes, and then he built the picture on top of it. And that was a big surprise. This painting, the Voyage is my favorite because it comes with a story. In 1947, the Museum of Modern Art had a big mural show. Many of you must know the Jackson Pollock painting called Mural. It's like a key element in the movie Pollock. It was made for Peggy Guggenheim, and a big fuss is made that it was painted in one night, that Pollock had this big canvas, and he looked at it for months and months and months and didn't know what to do, and then all of a sudden one night he painted it. So when it was cleaned at the Getty and put on view last spring, it turned out that it wasn't painted in one night. In 1947, Lee Krasner thought it made a great story. Jackson Pollock never said it. Lee Krasner said it, and in 1947, when it was exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art, that's when he signed it. And in this show, God bless you, in the show at the Museum of Modern Art in 47, there was this huge mural that Miro made for a hotel in Cincinnati. It's a drop-dead Miro. It's gorgeous. But it had lots of large paintings. So this is in Motherwell's head. He moves back to New York. He talks about how, do you all know where the restaurant Scarpetta is on 14th Street? They knocked down where he lived, but he lived a couple doors up from Scarpetta. Well, there was no Scarpetta then. His wife has left him. The abstract expressionists, the surrealists have moved back to Europe. Pierre Charot, who was like a father figure to him, has died. He feels abandoned and depressed and melancholic. And suddenly, there's this huge blizzard one night in December 1948. So he stretches butcher paper And I have not talked about how many of the paintings were made on paper. He stretches the butcher paper, and you can see where he tacked it. And in one night, beginning at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, and finishing, he says, at 10 o'clock in the morning, he makes this painting. Now, it's part of, he knows that Jackson Pollock has done this. And the best part is, the next night, he makes another picture in one night. And that one's owned by the Rockefellers and is in their estate. Yeah, exactly. But I love the idea. He rises to the challenge. I mean, Pollock didn't even do it, but Motherwell did. He bans the picture. And this becomes a leitmotif of his career, these dividing the picture into verticals, though they don't touch the base. He's already thinking about alternating black and white. And this is why I mentioned that abstraction meant something else for him, and how the colors meant something else for him. They weren't just colors, and they weren't just shapes. Because once we had this to look at, and this is never on view at the Museum of Modern Art either, because they have an elegy to the Spanish Republic. It's how history gets written. It's kind of crazy. But we know that he began this picture at 7 o'clock at night. It was dark out. It was a blizzard, snow. He finishes it the next morning when it's light. And we kind of have a record. The black and white means exactly that, night and day. And if you look at the shapes, you can even relate to that a little bit. When we took the picture out of the crate, there are these capital A's, and it's like, what is that? I don't know. Yesterday when I was looking at the painting, I thought, they're shapes. They're shapes. That's what alphabets are. Who knows? Here's this man who was the valedictorian of his high school class, went to Stanford, went to Harvard, went to Columbia. Maybe he liked getting A's. I don't know.
Did he? He got all A's.
And I feel very badly because the most important painting he ever made is in the Art Institute of Chicago, and it's in such wretched condition it can't travel. He worked on it in 3 states. He exhibited it with the title, The Spanish Jailer's Wife. Then he repainted it, and it became more of an abstraction. And then he repainted it, and it became abstract painting with stripes. It's the largest painting he makes till around now. It's a long horizontal picture. And he was inspired by a Picasso still life from 1927, a studio scene that had 3 torsos and oval heads. And by the time Motherwell finishes the Art Institute picture, the only connection to Picasso is that white oval head. That's all he cared about. And it's sort of the way T.S. Eliot borrowed sources. You do something, you're inspired, and then you make it your own. But it's kind of amazing because that oval reappears in this picture. I always got a kick out of, I went to a graduate school where all of us did Picasso. But Picasso always knew when he was making a masterpiece. He always knew that that one canvas was going to be great. I don't know, maybe it's like playing tennis. You know when you're going to get on the tennis court that day, you're going to win, or hopefully. So I think he knew when he was painting this that he was on
Is there any connection between this painting and the background painting, which is called The Voyage also?
Oh, thank you for asking. No. Motherwell, and we do this in the catalog, Motherwell loved poetry. And it's a wonderful thing about his generation, how much poetry meant. I mean, I grew up with TV. Kids grow up with the computer today. Everybody has whatever. Motherwell was a reader. And as a little boy in Washington State, he would live at a bookstore and just buy books. When they went every summer, the Motherwells had a beach house in Washington State, and his grandfather had a library that he loved. He was a big, big reader. And by the time he was studying philosophy, and he said he became a philosophy major because it involved so many different disciplines, everyone felt that his project should be translating Delacroix's journals. And I was thinking on the walkthrough today, I would mention that the paintings, Motherwell's paintings, are his journals, but he loved Baudelaire, Delacroix. And Baudelaire, one of the greatest poems is The Voyage. And the last lines of the first big verse, the first section, is about the voyage and having the guts to go into the unknown. It's very touching. I think I quoted here, I must. Baudelaire writes, "To the depths of the unknown to find the new." So thank you for asking. Motherwell's titles at this point are all significant. And so this is from poetry, that's from poetry. And we have, I think we quote 5 poems in the catalog with the paintings that relate to them. So if you don't mind, we'll go in the other room. I think you know the photographs of the house are back there, unfortunately. So Motherwell just, I can't figure out when he had his spare time. To some extent, I think, well, that's why his wife left him.
Which one?
The first one. The first one. Motherwell made collages, painted. He played sports. He was a tennis player. He played baseball. Jack Twerkoff used to talk about the club and how he liked to go to the club because he liked to dance. Motherwell talked about the wonderful softball game they played every Sunday at Black Mountain College. And Motherwell was a tall guy. He must have been a good hitter. But he also edited books. And in the room with the photographs, the Adlers were very generous in lending us some of the books that Motherwell edited. And he wrote the introductions and the prefaces to all these books that translated the leading painters of the beginning of the century into English. Kandinsky, Arp, Max Ernst. I was trying to think of another country. And he also edited this little magazine called Possibilities. It only came out in 1 issue. It combined Europeans and Americans. Rothko had one of the most famous artist statements he ever made is in Possibilities, and Motherwell retitled it, which made Rothko look that much better. David Smith is in there. It's just a treasure.
When he translated, did he know all the languages?
No, he didn't. Someone else did the translations, but he knew many languages. And Motherwell was also unusual in that someone like Jackson Pollock, I mean, everyone could talk about he lived on the other side of the highway, but he had certain advantages. His father had studied law and then became a bank president. And as they traveled, in his early years, Motherwell's family traveled for his father's work as if he were an army brat. And his father did eventually end up being the president of Wells Fargo. And took, just before the war broke out, took Motherwell on a grand tour of Europe. And so Motherwell knew what the Marie de Medici murals looked like in the Paris, in the Louvre. He knew what a large painting was. Jackson Pollock never saw those large paintings. Rothko never saw those large paintings. It was an interesting aspect of his art that he saw that stuff in person, and it was up here. And he was also, in talking about his friendships, Rothko went to Yale. Clifford Still even had a master's degree from the University of Washington in Pullman. Motherwell's closest friends among the Abex painters were the best educated ones. So he kind of brought, he'd seen the art and he had people to talk about it with. So for that first issue of Possibilities came out, they planned a second issue. The second issue was never made. He made an illustration for a poem by the art critic Harold Rosenberg. Harold Rosenberg started as a leftist poet. And at the time, about the time he made The Voyage, he made this work. He had made a version of this for Possibilities as an illustration. It was going to be in black and white. And then he came across it and he made a slightly larger version. It originally had a blue ground. You can see it peeping through. This becomes a quality of Motherwell's work, that he has the ground and then paints it out, but lets it show through. You could sort of see it with the swish here. This becomes the prototype for the elegies to the Spanish Republic. But the way we have all been taught Abex, this is made in 1948-49, and then you think, okay, he's made it, he's just going to make those. He does not really paint the elegies until the end of the 50s. They become a preoccupation, but he makes very many different pictures throughout the early 50s. This show is like the first introduction to say, we have not exactly known who Robert Motherwell was. When he had retrospectives at the Museum of Modern Art, and then I saw the next one in San Francisco. It was organized by the Albright Knox. He squelched these pictures. Very few of them, it was his fault that these became unknown pictures. He kept this one, and in his divorce from Helen Frankenthaler, she kept this. And this was opposite Helen's bedroom door in Connecticut. So there was a great love of his art, and that's why I dedicated the essay to her. But this is just such a gem. And you see, like The Voyage, he has these verticals dividing the picture, but they're not, you know, Frank Stella hasn't made his black paintings yet. And I do have to say that Barbara Rose was very emphatic recently in talking about how important Robert Motherwell was to the black paintings of Frank Stella. So if we put a Frank Stella next to it, you get the difference between the two generations, but you also get the similarities. He also was very much into shape, and a lot of people like to interpret what the shapes of the black ovals were. But he had an obsession with discs and verticals, and you'll see in the corner, he just is trying to work through it. There's a photograph of Motherwell in his studio he made so many variations on this before he decided to make the Spanish elegies. And my question is, why? I mean, you see these beautiful works, these lyrical abstractions. Why did he decide so much later to go with the Spanish elegies? When I saw this painting, it's a weird picture. It's on the cover of the catalog. I did not see it on a wall when I first went to St. Louis. I've fallen in love with it. It's like crazy picture, interior with pink nude. You see the interior, just there's a shelf. Is that a plant? Is that a fan? We have this buxom woman. So early in July, I walked into a gallery at the Nelson Atkins and saw de Kooning's Woman 4, and I went, oh my God. Motherwell was thinking about de Kooning. Now, I didn't mention in 1944, 45, the Pollocks, Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock, borrowed his house while they were house hunting, and he was teaching at Black Mountain. In 1953, Leo Castelli lived across the road. Leo Castelli was friends with Pierre Charot, and Pierre Charot said, hey guys, why don't you buy the house across the road? Leo Castelli later credits Motherwell for introducing him to art by young American artists. Leo Castelli's house guests, because he did not yet have a house out here, were Willem de Kooning and Elaine de Kooning. At one point, he outgrew painting on Leo Castelli's porch and used Motherwell's studio. When the house was sold, they found all of these works on paper from the women's series. So yes, there was a connection with Motherwell and de Kooning at this moment. He's probably thinking again, well, what does it mean to be an abstract artist? He's going more towards the now you see it, now you don't. The glass is half filled, half empty. I will say, when the director of the de Kooning Foundation walked in to see the show, she saw this picture and her first reaction was, that's de Kooning pink. So this is like, this show has just opened up so many avenues to be explored. But if you didn't know this was called Interior with Pink Nude, it's just a pink shape. And that's how Motherwell wanted it, I think, to be seen in the end.
Who was older, Motherwell or de Kooning?
Oh, de Kooning was way older. Motherwell was the youngest of all the Ab-X painters. He was born, Motherwell was born in January 1915, so it's his centennial next winter. This is a kind of odd painting to have in the show because it's a 1951 painting that a 1951 painting that was covered over in 1963. I think I said he had this habit of painting out pictures, working with mistakes. going over, changing, modifying. This is a painting he kept in his house until he passed away. It's kind of funny. The lender lent something to my Robert Smithson show that was at Montclair last winter. And when I met him to thank him, I mentioned I was doing a Motherwell show, and he was like, oh, I own a Motherwell. So through the generosity of Michael Strauss, we have this unique picture. Motherwell covered it over with black, put in this line, and transformed it into his Iberian series. But when he covered it over with black, it was a different black than he used on all the other pictures in this gallery. And the black settled, and the original shapes came through. And I mean, it just looks great on this wall. And you see how it's all of one piece, how an artist can change his mind. And usually pentimenti are of a different sort. So this is just this astonishing, unique picture.
Why did he want to cover it over?
Who knows? We don't know what color's underneath it, whatever. But the owner was really happy to see it on the wall between these two pictures. I don't have much to say about this, except this room seems to be Motherwell, working with verticals, dividing the picture. Here he's exploring with a different color. There was a uniqueness about the end of the 40s. There was a major Matisse retrospective in Philadelphia at the museum, and the next year was Alfred Barr's great Matisse retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art. Given that the two cities were so close together, it's kind of surprising. But Motherwell took advantage of it. And the shapes in this room, I kind of argue, here was this artist who had been so influenced by Picasso and Matisse, but now he really tries to see what he could do exploring Matisse's art, and he kind of Motherwellizes Matisse. And the color in this, I just think, comes out of that quality. In the other corner is an astonishing group of studies for a painting that we could not borrow because it's in a synagogue in Milburn, New Jersey. And after the war, sorry, I just decided to change my mode of attack here. After the war, there were so many new opportunities for modern architecture in America. The GIs came back, baby boomers, were born. We had to go to school. Our parents had to go to churches and synagogues. And the generation of architects who had been trained at Harvard and at the Bauhaus, people like Walter Gropius, who was running the program at Harvard, Goodman, whose brother was the famous philosopher, he was an architect. Motherwell got a commission to make a mural for the entrance hall of a synagogue in Milburn. Gottlieb made the Ark Curtain, and Herbert Ferber made a sculpture of a burning bush on the facade. Motherwell made another series for a temple in Springfield, Massachusetts. Anyway, he was a researcher. As I've said, he had graduate degrees. He went to Meyer Shapiro, who had been his mentor at Columbia. Meyer Shapiro gave him books to read about Jewish imagery, and he made a series of studies, small, large, painted, ink. There are some others, if you go on the internet, but the prices are going up, especially since the Guggenheim show was so successful. So eventually, he made the mural with the Ten Commandments, Jacob's Ladder, and a menorah. And these are studies that were lent to us by the Jewish Museum. And it's funny because in this free-flowing idea of how you interpret shapes, people have seen everything in this, not necessarily the Ten Commandments, Jacob's Ladder, or a menorah. And that has been kind of fascinating. But this goes back to the notion of mural and the show that was at the Museum of Modern Art and the Voyage, and Motherwell taking decided imagery. What do you put on a mural for a Jewish synagogue? And also, again, when he made the mural, it had a slate blue ground, but by the time he finished it, he painted out the slate blue ground. And if you go there, it's really cool work. You just sort of get a glimmer of the blue. There was a reason why Harold Rosenberg called one of his first books of collected writing The Age of Anxiety. And Motherwell seems to have been at the head of the anxious list. So on this wall, we just have a slight allusion to the many works in black and white that Motherwell made at this time. The variations. Underneath here, I'm convinced there's another picture under here. He painted it out. He made just a series of works like this with stripes and the black shape. In a famous photograph of Motherwell in his studio in 1944, it was blown up at the Guggenheim, and they didn't crop it. The photograph is usually cropped. And in it, you see two paintings by Seurat on his study wall. And one is the Grand Jatte. And when you look at the Grand Jatte, I'm sorry, that's a forest, and they're trees. For Motherwell, they were verticals. And Barbara Rose read my essay, and she said, I loved it, blah, blah, blah. But Motherwell, I knew Motherwell well, and Motherwell was not interested in Seurat. Well, okay, Barbara Rose knew Motherwell well in the 1960s. We're talking about a man in 1944 that has two Seurats on his study wall. And I think that is the genesis of these verticals. I mean, it's just so clear. I mean, he's looking at them day in and day out. And it's important to me because this is a formal device, and in the end, you do look at a painting based on the formal devices. But he himself said he didn't make this up. And this was another day in another age. And what I love about this show is it brings us back to the 40s and tells us we have to use the mindset of the period. We can love it with our aesthetic, but they were made at a very different time that has, to some degree, been misrepresented. And I think Motherwell was misrepresented because he made these pictures before there was anything called abstract expressionism. And what he brought to that movement was his love of French art. And what he got out of becoming friends with his new colleagues was entering into the dialogue of inventing American art after the war. So thank you.
Thank you.